CPG, I would request Asfar Essen to really formally start that with the opening remarks.
Thank you, Sajid. On behalf of Corporate Pakistan Group, I am grateful to all participants and especially our panelists for their presence here at the first dialogue on the Pakistan's economy and the recent challenges and the way forward as well. So we especially requested Federal Minister for Industries, Hamad Azhar. He is with us today. He's the chair of this discussion. Our President of Overseas Investor Chamber of Commerce and Industry and CEO of the Standard Chartered Bank, Shahzad Dada is here as panelist. Maheen Rahman, she is the CEO of Al-Falah Investment Management. Muzammil Aslam is economist and CEO of Mafa Capital, while Khurram Shadad is also analyst and he's a board member of Privatization Commission as well. Sajid Aslam is our moderator. He's the country head of ACCA in Pakistan. While Dr. Amjad Waheed is the CEO of NVP Funds, a subsidiary of National Bank of Pakistan. He is our another panelist. So Corporate Pakistan Group is the host, and for the newcomers, for the non-members, I want to introduce that we started this group around 5 years back, and we have around 255 members from all over Pakistan. This is Pakistan's national intelligence actually. The corporate and business leaders, the 7 political parties, top leadership, many federal ministers, around 10 senators, federal secretaries, energy experts, chartered accountants, foreign policy experts, police officials, and also the serving and retired officers, senior officers of Pakistan Army, Navy, and Force. They all are members of the Corporate Pakistan Group. So in 4 cities, Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, and Dubai, we are hosting different discussions and meetups and roundtables since last 4.5 years. And this is no more a virtual group only. This is a classic example of disruption. So this is the first series. Tomorrow we are hosting another dialogue on business continuity during COVID-19 with another group of panelists. And next week we are hosting another panel discussion on crisis and opportunities after this post-COVID thing. So no more from my side. I'm again grateful to all the panelists, all the participants, and I hope that you will enjoy this productive discussion. And Sajid, over to you, please.
Thank you, Asfar, and thank you for introducing the panelists as well. If I may request Rizwan Tiwana, if he can share his views and the comments and welcome the participant at the same time. So Rizwan, over to you.
Thank you, Sajid. Thank you, Asfar. Asfar has introduced the Corporate Pakistan Group. I'd like to just give a little background of this debate. It started from a discussion within the group that there is a need to focus on what is happening to us and what is coming. That is why we deliberated upon it, and we decided that it is required that discussion around what considerations are being taken by developing the economic policy presently and going forward if necessary. We came up with the panelists, and I am very thankful for all the panelists for making the time to be available today. I would also like to thank all the audience which we have available, and I'm sure that they'll benefit from the mature discussion that we aim to have today. Back to you, Sajid.
Sajid logged out.
Sajid logged out.
What happened?
Host logged out.
I suggest Rizwan sab, you can take over. आप इसको अगर ले चलें आगे तो that would be fine. I can कोई इतना इशू नहीं होना चाहिए. I think अगर सजीद के साथ कोई प्रॉब्लम है तो आप उसको ले चलें आगे.
I'm there. I'm back.
Okay, he's back. चलो, जबरदस्त हो गया.
So thank you, Rizwan. Just quickly going back to creating the context first, the COVID-19 is definitely going to be a very unprecedented time, and I don't think the world have ever witnessed such a crisis before, and with such a massive impact, the way we know about the history at the moment, the people who are living in the current times. Given that it has got a major toll on the people, as well as it has got the economic impact all over the world. This particular panel what we will try to understand how we see the impact from a different perspective, and what kind of activities or what kind of initiative or what kind of solutions we can deploy there to really overcome that challenge. Just to categorize the challenge in terms of the economic impact, right now the level of uncertainty and the level of anxiety, financial anxiety, is very visible in the stock market around the world. At the same time, we see a different impact in different countries, but no country can really estimate reliably that where it will end and what it's going to take in terms of the resources and in terms of the time frame. So given that backdrop, Hamad Sahab, I'll open with you as a government. What you are seeing there, और आपका क्या ख्याल है कि इसका overall impact इस वक्त कहाँ पे stand करता है, and how you will categorize or define this problem given the current information what we know. Hamad sir.
जी, बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम. बहुत शुक्रिया. It's a pleasure to be here. मैं उर्दू में बात करना चाहूँगा क्योंकि फेसबुक पे बहुत ज़्यादा मेरा ख्याल है लोग हैं जो देख रहे होंगे और बेहतर समझने में उनको आएगा. ये जो हमारी इस वक्त सूरत हाल है इकोनॉमिक, इसके दो पहलू हैं गवर्नमेंट की नज़र से. एक इसका एक इमीडिएट पहलू है जिसमें हम एक लॉकडाउन की सूरत हाल में हैं और उसके अपने चैलेंजेस और अपने डायनामिक्स हैं, और एक उसके बाद मीडियम टर्म है जिसको हम रिस्टोर और रिहैबिलिटेशन का नाम दे सकते हैं. जो लॉकडाउन की सूरत हाल है, इसमें नंबर 1 प्रायोरिटी गवर्नमेंट की ये है कि आपका सोशल और इकोनॉमिक ऑर्डर जो है वो प्रिजर्व रहे, यानी कि आपकी एसेंशियल कमोडिटीज़ की जो रसाई है वो लोगों तक रहे, आपकी मार्केट्स जो हैं एसेंशियल गुड्स और कमोडिटीज़ की वो फंक्शन करती रहें, आपके जो आम लोग हैं उनके पास आमदन होनी चाहिए, उनके पास वसाइल होने चाहिए कि वो मार्केट्स में जाके अपनी रोज़मर्रा की अशिया ख़रीद सकें. दिस इज़ फ्रॉम द डिमांड साइड. तो सप्लाई साइड के ऊपर ये बहुत ज़रूरी है कि जो प्रोडक्शन फैसिलिटीज़ हैं वो सारी एसेंशियल आइटम्स की चलती रहें, उन तक रॉ मटेरियल पहुंचता रहे. और हमारी नंबर 1 प्रायोरिटी इस वक्त जो है वो एक आम आदमी है और एक उसके लिए सस्टेनेंस जो है वो रहे और आपकी सोसाइटी के अंदर जो है ताकि ऑर्डर भी बरकरार रह सके. अब इट्स अ डेवलपिंग सिचुएशन ऑब्वियसली. इस वक्त हम कुछ नहीं कह सकते हतमी तौर पे कि ये लॉकडाउन की जो सूरत हाल है वो कब तक रहेगी और कितना इसको एक्सटेंशन मिलेगी या नहीं मिलेगी. फिलहाल तो हमें ये पता है कि 14 अप्रैल तक जो है सूरत हाल ऐसे ही रहेगी. 14 अप्रैल के बाद अगर हमारे लॉकडाउन में कोई मॉडिफिकेशंस आती हैं, चाहे वो कंस्ट्रक्शन सेक्टर के हवाले से हैं या इंडस्ट्रीज की ज़्यादा रिलैक्सेशन शुरू होती है, जो खुलना शुरू होती हैं, तो आई गेस के देन वी कैन कॉल इट कि वी विल स्टार्ट गोइंग इनटू अ रिस्टोर फेज और मे बी अ लिटिल आफ्टर दैट. और उस दौरान जो है हमारी अवलीन कोशिश ये होएगी कि जो सबसे वल्नरेबल सेगमेंट्स थे, एसएमईज हैं हमारे, या जो हमारे इकोनॉमी की लाइफलाइंस हैं लाइक एक्सपोर्टर्स हैं, उनको सबसे पहले बहाल किया जाए. फाइनेंसिंग स्ट्रीम्स उनकी जो है वो बहाल की जाए. हमारा एक इकोनॉमिक स्टिमुलस पैकेज अभी है सामने आप सबके 1200 अरब का, वो तकरीबन 7-8 अरब डॉलर का उसका हुजम है पूरा, उसके अंदर भी ज़्यादा जो फोकस है वो आम आदमी के ऊपर है, कैश स्टाइपेंड्स के ऊपर है, हैंडआउट्स के ऊपर है, एसेंशियल गुड्स की सब्सिडीज के ऊपर है, यूटिलिटी स्टोर्स कॉर्पोरेशंस के ऊपर है, लेकिन एट द सेम टाइम बिजनेसेस के लिए भी चीज़ें हैं उसके अंदर, प्रिंसिपल प्लस इंटरेस्ट के डिफरल्स हैं, सब्सिडाइज्ड क्रेडिट है, और जो आम आदमी के लिए उसमें एक चीज़ मैं मिस कर गया जो बहुत ज़रूरी थी और बहुत बड़ा टिकट आइटम है कि वो बिजली और गैस के बिलों का डिफरल है। तो जो इमीडिएट फेज है, लॉकडाउन फेज है, उसमें नेचुरली गवर्नमेंट की फर्स्ट प्रायोरिटी जो है वो ये कि जो 20 करोड़ लोग हैं और इतने सारे करोड़ों हाउस होल्ड्स हैं, इन तक बेसिक कमोडिटीज, बेसिक गुड्स पहुंचती रहें और प्रेफरेबली थ्रू मार्केट्स पहुंचती रहें, ना कि हमें इंडिविजुअली हर घर में खुदा न खास्ता राशन पहुंचाना पड़े। प्रेफरेबली मार्केट्स के जरिए पहुंचती रहें और लोगों तक हम वसाइल भी पहुंचा सकें कि वो ये गुड्स जो है मार्केट से खरीद सकें। पोस्ट द इमीडिएट फेज, जिसमें अगर हम कह लें कि पोस्ट द लॉकडाउन फेज, बल्कि that is where we will start seeing economic activity pick up again in terms of के ज़्यादा इंडस्ट्रीज जो हैं वो उनको हम रिवाइवल की तरफ जाना चाहेंगे। एंड ऑब्वियसली इट्स अ शॉक टू द इकोनॉमी। हम इंटरनेशनल अपने जो डोनर्स हैं उनके साथ भी एंगेज्ड हैं टू लीवरेज मोर रिसोर्सेज इन द मीडियम टर्म, के ताकि हमारे पास फिस्कल स्पेस भी अवेलेबल हो, बजटरी स्पेस भी अवेलेबल हो कि हम आगे लेके जा सकें। स्टेट बैंक जो है वो इंटरेस्ट रेट्स को मॉनिटर कर रहा है इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी के साथ साथ। आई एम श्योर कि वो उसके अंदर भी उस मॉडिफिकेशंस लेके आते रहेंगे। तो इट्स ओवरऑल इट्स अ चैलेंजिंग एनवायरनमेंट, और इसमें तमाम अभी जो आपके एडवांस्ड इकोनॉमीज हैं वो भी दे आर कमिंग टू ग्रिप्स विद द होल चैलेंज। और अभी इसका किस तरह ये प्ले आउट करेगा, किस तरह पैन आउट करेगा, इसमें जाहिर है कि थोड़ी सी अनसर्टेनिटी तो है, बट आई डू फील के हम क्योंकि एक स्ट्रॉन्ग एग्रीरियन बैकग्राउंड से हमारा मुल्क बिलोंग करता है, more than 70% of the population is supported by agriculture in the rural areas. So this is something that is going for Pakistan. But at the same time, the fact that 25% of people live below the poverty line, that is something that is not going for Pakistan. जिसका मतलब है कि लॉकडाउन जो है उसको हमें बैलेंस करना पड़ेगा इकोनॉमिक compulsions के साथ. So this is where we currently stand. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ahmad. I'll try to invite Shahzad in the conversation here. Shahzad, you just heard Ahmad, where he was talking about the kind of stimulus package which is available by government of Pakistan. You are a president of OICCI, and you are also heading one of the global bank, and you are interacting with the different clients and the different industries at the same time. What kind of concerns you are hearing from within the OICCI and as well as from the Standard Chartered perspective? What is your definition of the problem right now, what we are facing, and how these organizations are planning to handle this one?
Yeah, thank you, Sajid, and thank you, Sajid, and thank you, Asfar, for inviting me on this panel. Frankly, I would not have thought about being on this panel in this manner 3 months ago. So these are extraordinary times and require extraordinary measures. And as Hamad Saab just said, I think the government is really working 24/7. If there's more than 24 hours, I think they're working more than that, trying to resolve. And clearly, as Pakistani, as OICCI, and as a banker and banks, we are fully behind them. And obviously, we are going to, inshallah, work together and come out of this, because this shall pass also. The extent of this, nobody knows. If anybody on this panel or anybody outside this panel is going to predict what's going to happen tomorrow, I think they would be blatantly either foolish or lying. But I think one thing we know for sure, that this is having a material impact on our economies across the world. Or ye pehli dafa after a very long time that you're having both the demand side shock and a supply side shock, which is, typically we have dealt with one. And I think we have good examples and good lessons learned from all of that. So I think first and foremost is, I think it's an enemy we don't know. It's timing we don't know. And clearly, I think it's impacting both sides of it. And no sector or no economy is insulated. Some are more, some are less. And I'll just briefly touch upon that. And I think forecasting right now is very unreliable. I think initially when it started, we all were talking about a V-shaped recovery. Ki ye aaya, ye chala jayega, and it will be a V-shaped recovery. And I think we thought the impact will be limited. Then we started talking about a U-shaped recovery, which again, hopefully in Pakistan's case is possible and plausible. And we'll talk about a bit. There's experts on this panel who can talk a lot more intelligently than myself. And the third case is an L-shape, which clearly will be very damaging, and it will have a longer impact. So I think the question mark is, where are we going to be on that recovery? And the extent of that will how quickly this virus is contained and what do we do, and are we going to follow government's instructions, orders on lockdown and the aftermath. And while we're doing that, keeping in mind the parallel problem that we have, it's about our people, as Hamad Saab was identifying, that we have that large population. So I think this is going to be an important one. When we take that in concert with the point that hamari jo economy has interlinkages to global economy, at times we have criticized that we are probably not doing enough trade. But Abibi, if you look at our two big partners, we have China as one of our big supply side partners, and we have the West predominantly as our big export partner. And I think both of them have had their own shocks. And I think that's something that's going to really impact us from that point of view. And I think the national economy, some of the initial assessments shared by experts in the government is a whopping number of 2.5 trillion. So the problem is big, my friends. And I think the challenges and the solutions, some of that we'll quickly talk about it. Lots of non-essential industries have been impacted, have been suspended operations, and that's having also an impact, direct impact on LSM growth. And that's recently started showing in the numbers also. Sectors that are most impacted, I think we all have looked at it. We have all seen charts, but tourism, leisure, aviation, maritime, automobiles, construction, manufacturing, oil and gas. These are really hard hit sectors. Medium hit sectors are one of the sectors I belong to: financial services, education, agriculture. And then there's silver lining on this. There are some emerging sectors, and I think that's e-commerce, ICT, personal, healthcare, food processing, medical. And I think the real challenge is, inshallah, when we come out of this, how are we going to place ourselves and how are we going to really position ourselves, and what are the lessons learned and what are we going to really be thinking? Because a lot of thinking, I can tell you in my bank is, we've been preparing for this digital we've been talking about. And I think this has really given the impact of how the importance of digital is, because the banks and the companies that are really performing for their clients and for their stakeholders are the ones that have prepared themselves, not fully, but at least had some of the key ingredients for it. So I think one really needs to do it really quickly on from an OICCI perspective. I think while all our 198 companies that account for a third of the revenue of this country and our major employer for this country are being impacted, and there are some permanent losses that are being factored in. But having said that, we did a quick survey of our member firms, and mashallah, none of them have taken any hard measures of laying off people. In fact, they all are steadfast in overcoming this. If you look at the segments that we need to navigate, they're fully standing behind. We had the pleasure of meeting the Prime Minister and his economic team shortly before this COVID really broke in. And I think we talked about a number of things that we want. And we are not asking for any tax measure, tax relief. Our basic message is, and I think it's been well received by the economic managers of this country, is predictability, transparency, and consistency in the policies. And I think that's something that will really help us during this time and beyond this time. We also have been a big proponent of digitization. And I think digitization of supply chain is something that we all really need to really hone in on. Because if you really look at the traditional view, we had a very linear supply, and optimizing our own businesses and transforming into a digital supply network, where really we have everything linked in and it's end-to-end visibility hamare paas ho. And I think if one early lesson to be learned is the lack of that. And I think we have started on that journey. We've had some experts coming in like Tanya Edos and others. And I think we really need to really hone in on that. Taxation, I think this is an area, again, like I said, we are not asking for any tax breaks, but I think incentives and timelines to empower, to make sure employment generation is not impacted. Some of our sectors will require increased depreciation allowances, and I'll get into that for projects and reduction in withholding tax and all that, but no real कि हमें ये आप दे दें या ये SRO दे दें. Ease of doing business, I think this has been our mantra throughout. And then lastly, I think for multinationals, PKR stability. And for that, we are working very closely with the State Bank and Ministry of Finance, and obviously with multilaterals. And I think whatever help we can provide, because multinationals look at currency stability as an important factor for their decision making, and clearly don't like rigid shocks into the system. And we are seeing some of that, and I know people are working on it. So that's from an OICCI perspective. Really quickly on banks perspective, we have Marine, we have
Shehzad, just I'll request you, and I'll might have to move to Hamad. I just learned that Hamad Azhar might have to leave early. So I'll just picking up on the comment Shehzad made earlier, and Shehzad, I'll come back to you again, and we would like to learn from more from a bank side. Hamad, there are a couple of things which Shehzad raised, and those are very relevant and pertinent to the current situation. Number one, unreliability of any forecast which we can make based on any parameter. So that's definitely the same ship where the government is as well. And the second part, there are certain recommendations which are coming from the industry, whether it's a tax break or it's a cash flow support. And there are a couple of concerns which in the chat box I can pick up, like the layoffs and the employment challenges which we might see in a short run or in a short to medium term. So my question, Hamad, for you is how you are going to accommodate, what the channel the industry will be using to bring their recommendation, and how they can make sure those recommendations are properly, number one, heard, and those are validated and implemented. That's one area. And the secondly, if we get into the scenario where the forecast is tough, how we will make sure the businesses which might get into the trouble, particularly SME sector, how the government is going to support that SME sector, which is unable to predict the future at the current moment. So over to you, Hamad.
Right. Thank you. So, I mean, if you look at the cold hard facts, there are going to be some winners and there are going to be some losers as a result of this crisis. And I'm speaking purely in economic terms. Otherwise, obviously, humanity is a loser overall. So we have to identify which sectors are the hardest hit, and which subsectors within those broad sectors are the most vulnerable. I mean, the ones that don't have access to financial lines, the ones that will collapse if the government does not intervene, because the government's resources are limited. So naturally, we will have to prioritize, and that is something that will happen in the restore phase. One shortcoming that has come out, or something that we are going to work on, is that something that was earlier mentioned, that is the lack of digitization when it comes to the supply chains. So whether it's small, medium scale, or large scale, we need complete digitization, and that's a massive exercise that the government has to undertake. And we cannot wait for this crisis to be over. We have to start doing it immediately, because we immediately require that mapping down to the street level, down to the retail level. We need that mapping, and that mapping has to be very accurate. So that is something we'll do. So we have to identify the winners and the losers, and then we have to provide support to the losers, especially the ones that are high on the priority list. And I think we will find the resources. There is tremendous appetite in the international community to help us and support us during this crisis. And I'm saying that right now without knowing that, how it's all going to play out. Hopefully, let's hope that the weather has a good impact on this and the epidemic is blunted in Pakistan. One should hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So preparing for the worst, we are going to fully implement the economic stimulus plan. And beyond that, once this whole thing is over, obviously we will have a restoration plan as well. And we are going to come up with a comprehensive plan. And as you rightly pointed out, we are getting overwhelmed by communications from industries in distress, and obviously this is something that is predictable. There are industries in distress. They are not running. Their running costs are piling up, and people are obviously have been asked by the government to not lay off their workers, and they should not lay off their workers, and that's adding to costs as well. There's the financing cost as well that's piling up. So these distress calls are being received. We are analyzing them, and we are also, frankly, deciphering them from the ones that are purely extractive and trying to, extract tax concessions at the sensitive time. And there are more than a few, I can tell you with surety in this regard. But at the same time, a large number of them are genuine distress calls that they are making to the government. So the government will respond in time. But right now, the number one priority of the government is to provide sustenance to the more than 200 million people, to all the millions of households in the country, and to make sure, as I said earlier, that the economic and social order keeps running within the lockdown phase. This is a tough time for Pakistan, and we're all going through this unexpected epidemic. But that is the reality of life. We have to brave this out. And Pakistan is a very resilient country. We've had crises before, we've had calamities before in Pakistan, but we have always risen out of them. So we have to use this as an opportunity as well, to reform Pakistan, to reform the sectors, to undertake all the necessary things that needed to be done that were not done before. For example, health, IT, food, supply chains. This is going to be a major factor post-COVID in Pakistan. These are huge opportunities. There is going to be huge opportunities in these sectors. IT is going to be a huge sector. Communication is going to be a huge sector. The world is going to be very different. There are going to be different losers and winners post-COVID as well. So the government of Pakistan will try its best. We will prioritize, and we will reach out everywhere where we feel that this crisis has hit the most. And that's all I can say at this time.
Ahmad, there's one concern or a question, and before you leave, I just want to put it to you. The question is more around the transparency around the stimulus package which government is bringing out. How we can ensure and, number one, demonstrate that publicly that this was the package, this was the purpose, and that's how it's working and how it's creating an impact. Is there anything where the people can see that information and be more confident?
Right. So it's all going to be criteria based. All the stimulus package, all the things that we dole out, it's not going to be the discretion or the sweet will of one person or another. Everything is going to be criteria based, and the criteria will be out there for everyone to see. And I'm saying that keeping in mind that right now there's a balance that we need to strike between efficiency and control. And right now, obviously, we can't have complete control as we do in normal circumstances, because we need quick delivery. We need to roll out these things as soon as possible. So there has to be an element of greater efficiency as well right now. So, but nevertheless, it's going to be criteria based. It's not going to be discretion based. And we are going to try our best to make it as transparent as possible within these difficult circumstances.
Thank you, Ahmad. Ahmad, if you are staying with us, that would be lovely. But thank you very much for being with us. We would love if you can stay a little bit and we can post some of the questions I think we are seeing on the chat box, which are very
I can stay for 5 to 10 minutes longer. I can stay for 5 to 10 minutes longer.
Okay, so Shehzad, I'll come back to you again because we would like to understand the stance of the banking sector, which you were just about to say. And if there's any specific thing which we need as a policy intervention from the government, I think this is the time we can pass on that message to Ahmad Azhar at the moment. Over to you, Shehzad.
Yeah, sure. And if Minister Ahmad Saab wants to take any questions, while happy to pause and let him, given his time constraint. But really on the bank side, look, I think banks play a very pivotal role in moments like this. In any economy, banks are the leading indicators. And I think they have to play their role in these challenging times. And I think talking to other bankers also, I think we all are ready to do the needful. I think banks will also have their own set of challenges because clearly on one hand, we are seeing, and for all the right reasons, interest rate contraction, which is obviously linked to expected inflation and all the other variables that we have. And we are seeing stimulus package throughout the world being provided by central bank. And at the same time, we are going to see heightened provisioning. Some of this, as I think Ahmad Saab also alluded to, I think we really have to be very careful and not make sure that people are just taking advantage of a crisis to make up, to take advantage of the situation. And I think this is an area where I think we really, as banks and as regulator and as stakeholders, because by taking that undue advantage, real people will suffer. And I think right now the real economy needs as much boost as possible, especially the SME sector, which has been neglected. And I think we'll, in my next discussion that we'll have after in later on in this thing, I'll talk more in detail about the impact to the banks and what they need to be do. But I think that's something that's clearly out there. Business is getting impacted for some banks, especially the ones who are not prepared for this digital way of doing it. Mashallah, a lot of banks are doing a good job. And obviously volatility in prices is also going to impact asset classes, collateral. And I think some of the smaller banks will get pressured. For that, the regulator, State Bank, has come up with a series of measures. And thank you for that by the governors and the team. But I think we'll have to be observing that on a very regular front, because if we don't do it, it will put undue pressure, especially on banks that are not very well capitalized, because they could be getting squeezed from both ends. And I think that's something more to come on that. However, currently, I think the industry is very well capitalized. There are really no alarm bells in the system. And measures such as granting flexibility on reporting standards are very welcome. And like I said, this is happening throughout. Just suggestions on banks and the tax rate. I think this is a hot topic. We are one of the few, we are the only industry that's subject to a super tax. This tax was done when there was a long time back. All the industry got away with it. Banks are the ones who still are with it. So this is something that we have been through PBA and others, we are talking about it. I think there is going to be incremental loan losses, bad debts, and that's something that one will have to measure themselves. Rate cuts, as I've talked about, but there may be more to come for right reasons. So I think banks all need to think out of the box, think about how we can navigate through this period. As I said, there are a lot of lessons learned. We have been big on, Standard Chartered has been big on digitization. Brick and mortar is not our strategy. And I think what we have seen, we are operating full, effectively full force but we have doing it all through digital channels, and it's working very well. So I think it can be done. You have to have the will and you have to have the way. For that, I think some of the measures that we need is cloud storage, a lot of other regulatory support we'll need from the regulator, and they're fully we are speaking to them and we're talking about that. So I would just, in interest of time, I would just say that, look, I think banks are, I think one last part I would just say, while we have been, this is a global crisis, but the fact that we have been a bit too insulated, which is going to come and help us here. Because if you look at our economy, we are self-sufficient. If you look at it, we have some areas that we were really trying to build. Tourism, for example, we don't have, so it's not getting impacted like a country like Egypt is going to get hit, or Thailand is going to get hit with. I think if you look at some of our
Shehzad, I think we will come back on that. And
let me just finish one part. So I think that from that side we are insulated, and I think we really need to reorganize and reinvent in the midst of all of this problem, because I think we will see a lot of opportunities of how we do business, and we can leapfrog some of our historic legacy issues out of this crisis. Thanks.
No, thank you, Shehzad. And Hamad, there's a one concern or something which you can take back from a government is the risk sharing with the businesses. Definitely businesses are going to hit badly. And there's one area where we see some of the comments are that the government should open up and start doing a risk sharing in some cases where the banks are also putting up the cash flows and supporting businesses. So there has to be certain risk sharing which should come from the government side, and the business can't really sustain those risks. Any comment on the risk sharing approach, not only like handing over the cash flows, but some of the risk which we don't know right now, the government should be more open to support in those areas.
Yeah, so that's correct. I mean, there has to be some risk sharing ideas now, and the governments all over the world are extending their guarantees as well to many of the banks' lending portfolios. So we have to look at the banks' balance sheets as well, and we obviously expect a rise in NPLs, and that is going to be a natural outcome of this. But the government will be willing to share risks, and we will be willing to entertain ideas about extending government guarantees as well to priority sectors and the ones that have been particularly hit hard, So obviously it's quite a challenge balancing between both the things, that on the one hand, we are getting inundated by requests from all sorts of businesses, the ones that are actually hit and the ones that are just using this opportunity to extract further tax concessions. I think they're just polluting the whole debate right now. But at the same time, the majority of the people have actually been badly hit by this, and the government is cognizant of the fact, and we are willing to extend a lending hand to them. But right now, as I said, the priority is during the lockdown is sustenance for the millions of people. And we expect corporations to go out of their way as well in not just retaining their employees, but actually being on the ground. And it's time to really, start giving back as well. And Pakistan has such a great track record of generosity as well. So just as a closing comment, I'd just like to say that, all the corporations in Pakistan and have had this great drive, and Pakistan is so noble in this sense, and we really need all corporations to join their hands with the government's effort, and it's time to start helping the people.
Thank you, Ahmad. Thank you very much there. So thank you for being with us, and we will pass on any questions later to you or your office if there's, and we will be sharing some of the recommendation at the same time coming out of this panel discussion. Thank you very much, Ahmad.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So, Dr. Saab, and we can see some of the uncertainty within our own stock market, although we have seen some of the recovery very recently. Now, given the scenario, how you see that capital markets moving forward in foreseeable future, and how we can retain and maintain the investor confidence in Pakistan? Dr. Amjad Wahid. Sir, you are on mute. Amjad Saab, you are on mute right now. Okay.
Yeah, can you? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, fine. So, if you look at historically at the Pakistani stock market and its performance, is very closely related to the current account situation of the country, deficit of the country, and interest rates. Basically, the current account deficit and the budget deficit increase the risk of a country. So as your current account goes up, your reserves go down and your default risk increases. And what we have seen historically, that whenever current account deficit has gone up, basically the stock market has gone down. So in the context of basically, the coronavirus, we want to look at how the current account will be impacted by all of this. And so there are three aspects of the current account, which are exports, imports, and remittances. So if we look at exports, I think from what I've talked to the exporters and what we've heard from Razak Daud Saab, etc., exports are going to get hit this fiscal year by about $3 to $3.5 billion. And remittances are going to be down by close to $1.5 billion in the next, say, 3 months or so. So that's about a total of about $5 billion that we're going to get less in terms of foreign inflows. At the same time, if you look at imports, we're expecting imports to be down by $6 billion. And the low oil prices and commodity prices, less machinery import, less food item import, all of this will have an impact. And so on a net basis, we are expecting that the current account deficit will be lower by $1.5 billion versus what it would have been otherwise if there were no virus. And so overall, we were projecting a current account deficit of $5.5 billion for this year, which now we are projecting about $4 to $4.5 billion. So lower current account deficit basically generally obviously is good news for Pakistan, but it's also good news for capital markets. If we look at the budget deficit, we're expecting that revenues now will be lower by about 2% of GDP because as an impact of that. On the other hand, in terms of expenditure, because of the lower interest rates now, debt servicing will be lower by a couple of $100 billion. And Development spending, I think the government is now cut on development spending by about, say, 400 billion or so. And that's the 600 billion in terms of saving from debt servicing and development budget, which is going towards this package that the government has recently announced to support the businesses, and a common man suffering from this. So overall, our budget deficit is going to go up by 2% of GDP, but I think IMF would allow us under the circumstances. And what we need to do now is go back to IMF and try to renegotiate the whole package, under the situation. Another factor that impacts the stock market in a big way is interest rates. Interest rates are already down from 13.75 to about 12%. We are hoping that in the next 3 months, they'll decline by another 1%, taking it down to about 11%. And then inflation, we expect it to further go down significantly next year, especially considering the slow economy. And so we're expecting that interest rates are going to go down to about 9% in the next year or so. 1% in this fiscal year, and then another 2% in the next fiscal year. And that's good news for businesses, for the stock market. There's a very high correlation. So if you look at a current account deficit and interest rates, historically 80% of the variation in the stock market has been explained by these two factors. So we expect that the stock market, which is now at a very low level, the earnings yield is close to 18%, the dividend yield is close to 8%. With attractive valuations, now already some money has started coming back to the market. But I think the market is expected to do well in the next year. Now, this is all based on the assumption that, we would get rid of this virus situation in the next 3 or 4 months. Some of the studies, like the one done by the Boston Consulting Group, they've done some mathematical models, not in Pakistan, but in India and the West. They expect that by June or July, basically we will be overall as the world in a very good position and quite down basically this curve.
Thank you, Amjad Sahab. And I think here I'll like to bring Maheen in the conversation. Maheen, it's Dr. Sahab is summarizing that there are good news coming for the investor and the stock market, and there is a prediction globally that around June, July, we will start seeing what Hamad was mentioning as a restore phase. So what you are hearing from the investor, how you are seeing those, specifically the smaller investor, what their concern, are they confident that, or they have ability to retain their investment, and they are willing to continue those maintain those investment within the stock market or capital market for that matter?
Thank you for that. I think, Iswakt, if we look at the way investors are behaving, whether they are small investors or large investors, the focus is very much risk aversion. Because there is so much uncertainty around this. So where we have seen, previously investors perhaps willing to take a bet on the stock market or willing to take, fresh positions, which was actually happening over the last 2-3 months or so. Now the idea is very much on cash preservation, on capital preservation for all types of investors. So the immediate sort of impact that we have seen is a move to safety. And I think we have seen that move to safety in investors globally, which is why you have seen treasury bill yields in the US drop, which is why you have seen gold prices spike. We are seeing a similar move to cash and cash equivalent type assets. So, money market funds are far more interesting right now than the stock market, even though valuations, as mentioned earlier, are very cheap. I think so the immediate aspect is to just preserve as much cash as possible, because we don't know whether we are a business or whether we are a small investor, how long this lockdown will continue and what the future impact will be. I think the second thing investors are focusing on very carefully is the government's policy actions at this point in time, because one thing you can see in governments globally is that the way the country has responded in terms of government action to the crisis, whether the policy action has been swift in terms of quickly imposing a lockdown or quickly shutting down schools, or then has been lax, where, you know, they say, okay, we don't think it's that much of a problem and we will let, you know, things like herd immunity kick in. There you have seen economies really suffer, and you have seen medical systems suffer, and you have seen, you know, huge numbers of infections, you know, go up. So I think the what people are really looking for is that element ke, you know, this lockdown is there. Will it really keep a, you know, a close lid on the number of infections that we see? And I think how the government responds in terms of relief packages, ek set to we have already seen come through. But future ke liye, because it is still uncertain which industries will take more benefit from this and which industries may actually become obsolete in some cases, you know, how will we be in a position to capitalize on that? So I think that's something that investors are certainly asking that question. I think एक बहुत अहम ground reality है इस वक्त जो आहिस्ता आहिस्ता sink in हो रही है कि there's a medical cost and there's an economic cost. And, you know, we have seen the governments in Punjab and we have seen the governments in the federal side as well, slowly, you know, opening up or allowing exemptions for certain businesses to operate. और इसमें ये है कि yes, that has been welcomed by the stock market. You know, you saw a 3,000 point plus rally last week on that. But again, the spike in infections was almost immediate. So you saw that dip down today, you know, where the market lost 1,000 points. So, you know, that reality is that how do we, you know, play this gamble? It is a gamble with people's lives in terms of the infection, but it is also a gamble with people's livelihoods. So I think ye jo cheez hai, isko balance karna, that, you know, it's quite critical how we do it. And that's something that's very much on investors' minds at this point. I think ye to sare short-term sort of cheezein thi. Agar hum medium-term soche and we talk about, as Hamad Sahab was saying, we talk about restoration of business. Here, even if we assume that we have controlled the virus and we assume that we as Pakistan are relatively insulated from the rest of the world, there are still going to be winners and losers. There are going to be businesses that may not be relevant in you know, the world of tomorrow. And there may be businesses which suddenly are quite small right now but become incredibly relevant. So ये चीज जो है ना हमारे export side पे, I think it will have quite a bit of an impact. So our exports, you know, we are predicting them to shrink about 20-25% this year, which is about $6 billion. And that $6 billion will be somewhat offset by the oil bill, which will also drop by about $5 billion or so. So net on the current account, we probably will see some benefit. But eventually we have to recover this export loss. And you know, iske liye we will have to see, well, you know, what are the businesses that will survive? And there, yes, it's harder to predict, but I think one thing is very clear, that investment in health infrastructure will go up, medical equipment, protective clothing, masks, sanitizers. These are things that can be manufactured locally and can be exported. Tech side pe aap dekhein, we have business process outsourcing. We have digital online, the demand for online education, online health. These will all go up, I think, quite exponentially. And I think we've talked a little bit about the supply chain on this as well. I think more and more, jo hai, we have to focus on our domestic supply chain, in particular on the agricultural side. We are very lucky that we are self-sufficient in two major staples, and that is rice and wheat. And if we can clean up our agricultural supply chain and reduce the hurdles on that, then I think we're looking at, you know, quite an advantageous position for us from that perspective. Ab ek cheez zarur aayi hai.
Sorry. Maheen, I'll come back because now you are entering into the solution side of it. So I think you very well articulated the problem side of it and the behavior. So we will hear how Muzammil, as an economist, is seeing the problem, how you define the current economic model. And Maheen, we will come back to you and everybody for the solution. So be prepared for 2, 3, or 5 key areas which we as a businesses or government should be focusing for that restoration, and most importantly, to have a growth rate which can really compensate the losses which we are incurring during this period. So Muzammil, we would be very keen to hear your perspective as an economist, how you see the problem, and what is the size or quantum of the problem as what we know today.
Thank you, Sajid. The most important thing, we need to see how, you know, COVID had hit our economy. In my view, our economy is going to be, down by at least 2% of the GDP. So our GDP with this COVID, we're going to suffer 2%. At the end of the year, by June 30th, our GDP is going to be around less than 1%. And in terms of dollars, the GDP loss is going to be between $6 to $8 billion. And per day, in my view, because if we are going to have 15 days lockdown, for example, 15 working days, so per day the loss is going to be $400 million. What does it translates into is it's $50 per capita. Pakistan have a population of 200 million people, so there will be a $50 per capita loss. And if you multiply by 6 household in the family, there will be a $250 to $300 loss, which translate into 40 to 45,000 rupees loss because of this COVID crisis in the country. That is just from the local side of the economy. Dr. Amjad Wahid, he talked quite in detail about the external side, and he was rightly mentioning there were 3 important components in our on the external side. One is export, other one is import, and the third one is remittances. Luckily, our export to GDP is one of the lowest in the world. I would not say luckily. This is unfortunate, but it's working well for us at the moment, because just a month ago we were talking about we have all the praises for Bangladesh and countries like Vietnam. Because of this COVID, they are in a deep trouble. Compared to this, our export sectors and our GDP is not going to hurt because of the slowdown in the exports. Just to give you a recap, just in the month of March, our exports just dipped by $200 million. Usually we are exporting $2 billion a month, but in March, our exports down to $1.8 billion. Similarly, the average run rate for the past 6-7 months, our import was $4 billion. That came down to $3.3 billion. So, in the slowing economy, actually, we tend to get more benefit in terms of slower imports. Hence, our external sector, get the favorable picture. In compared to that, we get huge remittances from overseas, which is about $2 billion a month. This number is very important to be seen, but in my view, the remittances will remain sticky downward. It's not going to dip massively, because there are a few reasons. So far, there has not been a massive layoffs outside, and our labor, the majority of the remittances we get are from the labor class as well as from the business remittances as well. We get a lot of freelance remittances, because a lot of young people, they work for different softwares and they get a lot of IT related remittances. Small exporters, for example, people are doing T-shirts, etc. They get through in the form of remittances as well. So I don't think so our remittances is going to dip that much. In my view, what the sectors really got hit in this COVID is services sector. If you look at the services sector of our GDP, it is about 52% of the GDP. And within services, the biggest sector is wholesale and retail trade. Because of this COVID, all markets and retail markets as well as wholesale markets are closed. So that is the biggest chunk. This is the biggest segment among the services sector is going to be lost. The other sector is transport sector. This is again, it's a huge sector. All local, and international flights have been shut, followed by, the domestic public transport as well. So this sector has been massively hit as well. But, again, unfortunately, these sectors are underbanked. They are self-financed. Most of the retail and wholesale and the transport sector in Pakistan is not actually, they are not taking finances from the banking sector. Shehzad Dada has mentioned a lot about the financial sector. But in my view, financial sector is relatively immune as well because of central bank timely intervention. Central bank has saved our banking sector, and it gives lot of relaxation. If central bank was not proactive, our banking sector would have been, booking lot of bad debts, etc. The other thing what I like to mention is out of this entire scenario, our external sector, which used to be a trouble in the last 2 years, is going to be insulated. But our internal economy, especially the durables, in the producing sector, the auto manufacturers, electronic sector is going to be suffered. But at the same time, our agriculture is getting boost because of a lot of government support, as well as the public charity. People are getting food. So I don't think so our commodity producing sector is going to be hit that much. Overall, I can see this crisis is going to cost us 8 to 10 billion, maximum $8 billion if this lockdown lasts till 14th of April. Every day will cost us $400 million minimum if we go beyond.
Thank you, Muzamil. Thank you. And I'll come back to every panelist when we will start talking about the solution. We would like to see top 3 to 5 recommendation in terms of sectoral interaction. But here I'll bring a conversation to Khurram, one of our very optimistic economic analysts. So Khurram, we would like to hear from you what you are seeing in the current scenario. Normally you are very, very optimistic and you always find some opportunity within the crisis. So let's see what we hear from you today. Khurram, you are on mute right now. Khurram, you are on mute.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you very much, Sajid. And I would like to start with the word optimism. Basically, optimism जो है वो सबसे important चीज है. अगर हम optimistic नहीं है तो मेरा ख्याल में हम फिर कुछ नहीं कर सकते. तो the key word is optimism. अच्छा, secondly मैं आपको एक छोटा सा अपने सारे audience को बड़ा basic इस चीज को करने की कोशिश करता हूँ ताकि to the point पता चले कि हम इस वक्त issues क्या हैं हमारे और हम उसको tackle कैसे कर सकते हैं. मैंने एक छोटा सा पेपर जो है develop किया है, वो हम अपनी ऑडियंस को बाद में शेयर कर सकते हैं, लेकिन मैं यहाँ उसकी कुछ एक्सट्रैक्ट्स आपसे डिस्कस करना चाहता हूँ. देखिए, मैंने जो प्रॉब्लम को जिस तरह से आइडेंटिफाई किया है वो उसके 5 जो है वो हिस्से हैं. नंबर 1 इज प्रॉब्लम स्टेटमेंट, वो है क्या. दूसरा, इकोनॉमिक इंपैक्ट उसके कितने हैं, एक्शंस हमें क्या लेने चाहिए, उसके बाद हमारी उन एक्शंस को लेने की स्ट्रेटेजी क्या होनी चाहिए, और फिर उसके बाद वे फॉरवर्ड क्या होना चाहिए. मैं स्टार्ट करता हूँ प्रॉब्लम से. मेरे सारे कोलीग्स ने बहुत अच्छी तरह से, बहुत ब्रॉडली, बहुत जबरदस्त तरीके से सब चीज़ों को कवर किया है. मैं कोशिश करूंगा बिल्कुल पॉइंट बाय पॉइंट चलने की कि एक्चुअली इशू क्या है. देखिए, अभी हमारे पास जो इमीडिएट इशू है वो 2 बड़े इश्यूज हैं. वो फाइनेंशियल प्रॉब्लम है और वो हेल्थ प्रॉब्लम है. यानी कि फाइनेंशियल इशू है, हमारे पास लोगों के पास जो है वो पैसे नहीं आए. एक तरफ लोगों की इनकम कम हो रही है, दूसरी तरफ जो है वो एक्सपेंसेस जो है वो बढ़ रहे हैं. बल्कि अगर ये कहें कि एक्सपेंसेस वहीं के वहीं हैं और इनकम नीचे जा रही है तो नेचुरली उनकी जो सेविंग्स है उस पर एक रन आएगा. अच्छा, हमारे पास हम हेल्थ इशू को भी एक तरफ रखते हैं कि एक्सेस टू हेल्थ वो होनी चाहिए, डेफिनेटली प्रायोरिटी है. बट फाइनेंशियल इशू क्या है उसमें, देखिए कीवर्ड है लिक्विडिटी. जब भी दुनिया में कोई प्रॉब्लम होती है, कोई इकोनॉमिक लॉस होता है, फाइनेंशियल इशू होता है, पूरी दुनिया में डाउनटर्न आता है, तो सबसे बड़ा जो एरिया है वो लिक्विडिटी है कि लोगों के हाथ से पैसा निकल जाता है. जैसे मैंने कहा कि इनकम कम हो रही है लोगों की, या तो उनकी जॉब जा रही हैं या फिर उनकी जो है वो सेविंग्स पर रन आ रहा है, सेविंग्स कम हो रही हैं, उनकी इनफ्लोज कम हो गए हैं, उनके आउटफ्लोज वहीं के वहीं हैं. तो मैं इसको एक कीवर्ड है हमारा लिक्विडिटी, फाइनेंशियल जो इशू है. उस लिक्विडिटी के अंदर एक बड़ी जो है वो चेन होती है, वो इनफ्लोज हैं वर्सेस आउटफ्लोज हैं. अच्छा, अब मैं ये बताता हूँ कि इसके स्टेक होल्डर कौन कौन है, कि इनफ्लोज और आउटफ्लोज किस किस को इम्पैक्ट कर रहा है. देखिए, कॉमन पाकिस्तानी को इम्पैक्ट कर रहा है, बिजनेसेस को इम्पैक्ट कर रहा है लिक्विडिटी, पाकिस्तानी बिजनेसेस, एंड थर्ड इज गवर्नमेंट. पाकिस्तानी जो एक कॉमन पाकिस्तानी है उसको कैश उसके पास कम आ रहा है, फूड का उसके पास जो है इशू होगा, क्योंकि कैश नहीं होगा तो फूड को अफोर्ड नहीं कर सकता, ना हेल्थ को अफोर्ड कर सकता है. दूसरी है बिजनेसेस के पास भी उनका बिजनेस नीचे जा रहा है या बंद हो रहा है. ऑन द अदर हैंड उनके जो आउटफ्लोज हैं वो नहीं रुक रहे, इनफ्लोज रुक रहे हैं. तीसरी चीज है गवर्नमेंट स्टेक होल्डर. गवर्नमेंट के जो फिस्कल स्पेस है वो बेसिकली कम होती जा रही है, क्योंकि टैक्स शॉर्टफॉल होगा बिकॉज ऑफ स्लो डाउन इन इकोनॉमी, और कंजम्पशन आपकी जो स्पेंडिंग है वो बढ़ेगी क्योंकि रिलीफ देना है. तो ये 3 स्टेक होल्डर्स हो गए. तो देखिए, प्रॉब्लम स्टेटमेंट हमें एक क्लियर हो रही है कि फाइनेंशियल इशू है और इसका इम्पैक्ट लिक्विडिटी पे आ रहा है. तो लिक्विडिटी को किस तरह से हम जनरेट कर सकते हैं. अच्छा, मैं स्क्रीन शेयर करना चाहूंगा. पहले मैं थोड़ा सा इकोनॉमिक लॉस अपना दे देता हूँ. जैसे हमारे कोलीग्स ने बताया कि कितना इम्पैक्ट होगा चौथे क्वार्टर में. एक्सपेक्टेशंस ये हैं कि 8 से 10% तक इकोनॉमिक लॉस हो सकता है, विच इज अराउंड $15 बिलियन हमारी इकोनॉमी पे चौथे क्वार्टर में. और अगर ये वर्स्ट केस होता है तो उससे भी ज्यादा हो सकता है, लेकिन आप $15 बिलियन अज्यूम कर सकते हैं. अच्छा, इसमें सबसे बड़ा लॉस क्या होता है. जिसको हमने कवर करना है वो है जॉब लॉसेस। जॉब लॉसेस में सबसे बड़ा इशू, सबसे हार्डेड जो सेक्टर है वो पॉवर्टी से नीचे जो लोग हैं, 1/3 हमारा पाकिस्तान में। और हम ये ना समझे कि वो 1/3 ही है सिर्फ पॉपुलेशन का, हमारे यहाँ एक और 1/3 सेक्टर है जो पॉवर्टी से थोड़ा सा ऊपर है बस, यानी कि 66% हमारी पॉपुलेशन का इस वक्त वल्नरेबल है। जो लास्ट 33% है वो इतना वल्नरेबल नहीं है, उसकी सेविंग्स हैं, उसके पास होगा, लेकिन इवेंचुअली वो भी आएगा। अब मैं आपसे एक चीज शेयर करने जा रहा हूँ, स्क्रीन शेयर करने जा रहा हूँ अपने सारे ऑडियंस से, कि हमने इनफ्लोज को कैसे देखना है, कि इनफ्लोज कहाँ से आएंगे, यानी कि जो सोर्स ऑफ आउटफ्लोज है वो क्या है, और सोर्स ऑफ इनफ्लोज की यानी कि फंडिंग, उनकी फंडिंग सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट है। अगर फंडिंग नहीं होगी तो गवर्नमेंट रिलीफ नहीं दे सकेगी, और प्राइवेट सेक्टर और गवर्नमेंट दोनों का रोल इसमें किस तरह से बन सकता है, मैंने पॉइंट बाय पॉइंट उसको कैलकुलेट करने की कोशिश की है। तो मैं ये स्क्रीन शेयर कर रहा हूँ आप लोगों से, प्लीज जरा इसका एक टेबल है, अगर वो देख लिया जाए।
जी प्लीज खुरम शेयर कीजिए।
जी, आई एम श्योर कि आपको ये नजर आ रहा होगा जो मैंने अभी स्क्रीन शेयर की है, और बेसिकली ये टेबल आपको नजर आ रहा होगा। देखिए इसमें मैंने किया क्या है, मैंने ये देखा है कि हाउ टू मैनेज लिक्विडिटी इन द सिस्टम टू फाइट कोरोना वायरस, उसके जो फाइनेंशियल इकोनॉमिक इम्पैक्ट है वो कैसे हो सकते हैं। देखिए गवर्नमेंट के टैक्सेस जो है वो शॉर्टफॉल 1.5 ट्रिलियन का एक्सपेक्टेड है, क्योंकि इसकी वजह से और ज्यादा टैक्सेस कम हो जाएंगे। एक्सपेंडिचर 2 ट्रिलियन का एक्सपेक्टेड है ज्यादा, वो कैसे 2 ट्रिलियन का एक्सपेक्टेड है। देखें पाकिस्तान का जो लेबर मार्केट है, पूरी लेबर जो है वो 75 मिलियन की एज पर वर्ल्ड बैंक, 75 मिलियन लोग जो है वो लेबर मार्केट है पूरी, इसमें 76% एज पर स्टेट बैंक 76% लोग जो हैं वो इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर में हैं। इसका मतलब क्या हुआ कि इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर के जो जितने लोग थे वो डे फर्स्ट से जो है वो या तो बेरोजगार हो गए, या फिर उनके पास बहुत कम सेविंग्स हैं, या बिल्कुल काम ना होने के बराबर है, क्योंकि लॉकडाउन तकरीबन पूरे मुल्क में चल रहा है 75% 70%। दूसरा एरिया कौन सा है, फॉर्मल सेक्टर। फॉर्मल सेक्टर में 7-7.5% गवर्नमेंट की जो है वो एम्प्लॉयमेंट है, उसको मैं हटा दूं तो 12 मिलियन लोग वो बनते हैं जो आपके कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर में 10 से 12 मिलियन एम्प्लॉयड हैं। अच्छा, अब मैंने निकाला कि कितनी सैलरी रिक्वायर्ड है 3 महीने की उस इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर को सपोर्ट करने के लिए, और कितनी सैलरी रिक्वायर्ड है 3 महीने के लिए अगर 30% कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर स्लैश कर दे, अपनी पूरे यानी कि ले ऑफ कर दे, सारे एम्प्लॉयज को निकाल दे 30% तक, तो उस पर कितना रिक्वायर्ड होगा। अगर आप देखें पहला लेफ्ट पे जो कॉलम है सोर्सेस ऑफ आउटफ्लोज, इसमें गवर्नमेंट जो सपोर्ट इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर को करेगी वो 2 ट्रिलियन रुपीस कर सकती है, क्योंकि 76% इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर में टोटल एम्प्लॉयमेंट का। फिर जो पास ऑन गवर्नमेंट कर सकती है यूटिलिटी, सेकंड अगर पॉइंट देखें यूटिलिटी पास ऑन, जिसमें पेट्रोलियम प्रोडक्ट प्राइसेस प्लस यूटिलिटी 175 अरब की वो गवर्नमेंट पास ऑन करे अगर। तीसरा है प्राइवेट सेक्टर, 3 महीने की सैलरी का इंपैक्ट पड़ता है 179 अरब रुपए। फिर 3 महीने की फाइनेंस कॉस्ट मैंने कैलकुलेट की है कि इन रेट्स पे तकरीबन 15% अगर आप रखें फाइनेंस कॉस्ट, यानी 11% प्लस 3-4% का स्प्रेड तो होगा उस पर, और जो टोटल फाइनेंस कॉस्ट 3 महीने की बनती है एक क्वार्टर की 258 अरब रुपए बनती है। इसके साथ साथ गवर्नमेंट अगर 50% टैक्स इंसेंटिव दे दे सैलरीड क्लास को, जितना सैलरीड क्लास है उसका 50%, यानी कि पिछले साल में 2 साल में 133 अरब रुपए सिर्फ सैलरी क्लास से गवर्नमेंट ने जो है इकट्ठा किया था, उसका 50% दे दे गवर्नमेंट, यानी कि 67 बिलियन अगले 3 महीने का एक क्वार्टर का जो है वो पास, ये एक क्वार्टर का है सिर्फ कि पास ऑन कर दे कि एक क्वार्टर तक हम सैलरी क्लास से टैक्स नहीं लेंगे, उसका 50% सिर्फ इंसेंटिव दे दे। ये तो हो गया 2.7 ट्रिलियन का सोर्स ऑफ आउटफ्लोज के, 2.7 ट्रिलियन का आउटफ्लो होगा, ये अगले 3 से 6 महीने का आउटफ्लो आप रखें। इसके अंदर गवर्नमेंट का शेयर 84% है, प्राइवेट सेक्टर का 16% है। अब मैं बताता हूँ कि इसकी फंडिंग कैसे हो सकती है। देखें एक तरफ तो आउटफ्लो होगा आपका, नेचुरली होगा क्योंकि आपने इकोनॉमी को सपोर्ट करना है, दूसरी तरफ उसकी फंडिंग कैसे हो सकती है। इंटरेस्ट रेट कट अगर आप देते हैं यहाँ से 6% पे इंटरेस्ट रेट ले जाएं, 6% पे, देखिए पूरी दुनिया में तकरीबन 70 ममालिक ने इंटरेस्ट रेट कट दिया है इररिस्पेक्टिव के वहाँ इन्फ्लेशन क्या है। इसलिए अगर हम यहाँ पे, क्योंकि जैसे हमारे कोलीग्स ने कहा कि इस वक्त डिफिकल्ट सर्कमस्टांसेस है, तो हमें आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स सिचुएशन है हमारे पास, उसका हमने इसी तरह से रिजल्ट्स, इसी तरह डिसीजंस ले रहे हैं। तो इंटरेस्ट रेट कट से 418 रुपए आ सकते हैं गवर्नमेंट को सीधे सीधे, ये एक क्वार्टर का याद रखिएगा, पूरे साल का नहीं है। इंटरेस्ट रेट कट से प्राइवेट सेक्टर को 125 अरब आ सकते हैं एक क्वार्टर के, यानी कि उनको रूम मिल सकता है। इंटरेस्ट रेट मोरेटोरियम लगाएं अगर 3 से 6 महीने का, तो 206 अरब वहां से बच सकते हैं प्राइवेट सेक्टर को। फिर प्राइवेट सेक्टर को इंटरेस्ट फ्री लोन दे दें 826 रुपए, मैंने किस तरह से किए हैं कैलकुलेट, कि अगर आप 1% कैश रिजर्व रिक्वायरमेंट होती है बैंकिंग सेक्टर की, जो स्टेट बैंक अपने पास कैश रखता है इन सर्कमस्टांसेस के लिए रखता है, ताकि बाद में जब खराब सर्कमस्टांसेस हो तो ये आ सके। फिर ऑयल का विंडफॉल मैंने कैलकुलेट किया है तकरीबन 250 अरब रुपए। गवर्नमेंट एक और चीज करे कि फॉरेन डेट पे मॉरेटोरियम ले ले। गवर्नमेंट 10 से 11 अरब डॉलर पूरे साल का पे करती है। अगर उसका सिर्फ 25% मॉरेटोरियम ले लेना एक साल का, तो 450 अरब वहां से जनरेट हो सकते हैं। फिर फिस्कल सपोर्ट आ सकती है डोनर्स की तरफ से, वो मैंने सिर्फ 500 मिलियन डॉलर्स लिए है। फिर एक बहुत बड़ा इशू हमारे यहाँ पावर सेक्टर का है, कैपेसिटी परचेज प्राइस की जो हम पेमेंट्स कर रहे हैं उसमें फोर्स मेजोर अगर गवर्नमेंट कर सके, एनी सर्कमस्टांसेस के लिए होता है फोर्स मेजोर, सिर्फ 6 महीने के लिए करे 143 अरब वहां से बच सकते हैं। फिर पाकिस्तान वन ऑफ द लार्जेस्ट चैरिटी कंट्रीज है इन द वर्ल्ड, 240 अरब रुपए नॉर्मल सर्कमस्टांसेस में हम चैरिटी करते हैं, ये तो अनयूजुअल सर्कमस्टांसेस हैं। तो मैंने सिर्फ 240 बिलियन वहां से ऐड किया है, तो ये इक्वेशन बिल्कुल जो है वो बैलेंस हो रही है। और आप नीचे देखें कि जो आउटफ्लोज इनफ्लोज का जो फर्क है दोनों का, वो ऑलमोस्ट जीरो है। गवर्नमेंट के पास ट्रिलियन का शॉर्टफॉल आ रहा है, वही शॉर्टफॉल ट्रांसफर हो रहा है प्राइवेट सेक्टर को। इन सारे एक्शंस की वजह से अगर ये सारे एक्शंस लिए जाएं तो मेरे ख्याल में आज हम 3 से 6 महीने हमें मिल सकते हैं, या इवन 1 साल पूरा मिल सकता है, जिसपे हम ये पूरे एक्शंस लें तो हमारी जो है वो डिलीवरी टाइम भी हो सकती है, हमें वक्त भी मिल सकता है कि हम इसको हैंडल कर सकते हैं सिचुएशन को।
Thank you, Karam. Thank you very much for elaborating this one. And I think there are a lot of requests from the people. They would like to have the copy of the document. We will see how we will share that. But now I'll bring, and you raised a very valid point. It's all around the cash flow and liquidity. And that's where I would like to have Shehzad Dada as well as Amjad Saab and Maheen, your view right around how this economy can really generate the cash flows, specifically if we are talking about the biggest sector which is going to be deprived is the wholesale and retail and transport and the agriculture sector, which are very much undocumented. They are not part of the banking channel most of the time, and they are not into digital in a big way. So if we are looking for a cash flow support or a liquidity within the economy, and the sector which are most vulnerable are not documented, how those cash flows are going to come from the banking or a capital market side of it. We can understand the government, but the government has got its own limitation if we are talking about the undocumented economy there. So starting from with you, Shehzad, the liquidity right now, the challenge which Shehzad has also, Khurram also referred there. So over to you, Shehzad.
Thanks, Ajit. Khurram is a dear friend of mine. अगर मैं खुरम की ये सारी चीजें कर लूं तो my whole script has changed, because banks, as you saw on him, will go out of business. I was just going to give a view on the banking sector, and liquidity is king. Look, in any crisis like this, liquidity is king and cash is king. And I think if I look at the banking sector right now globally, I'll start with globally, then come to Pakistan. Globally, I think the banking sector has done a lot of learning from the global financial crisis that we all went through in 2008. Pakistan, luckily, then also, and even now in this crisis, was relatively insulated. And if you look at it, the overall liquidity in the bank has improved drastically. Just equity ka main aapko bata दूं, it used to be 6 to 7% before the crisis. It's around 12 to 14%. Basel III standards, you know this better than anybody, I think has brought in a lot of discipline, and I think given a lot of buffer to the banking sector. And that's what's needed, because if you don't have a banking sector, none of this is plausible, right? And if you look at the 2 trillion package US has given, if you just take the US banks alone, they have 1.3 trillion additional in common equity and 2.9 trillion in high quality liquid assets. The banks ke paas over 4 trillion of liquidity padi hui hai to buffer these crises. That just tells you the health of what it is. I think now bringing it closer to Pakistan banks, I think we have also, and we can have a long debate on this some other time, but if you look at the industry, car, and I'm talking industry, there are some more, some less, is sitting at a very healthy 17%, ROE at 11.3%. NPLs bhar rahe, but they have been at very manageable levels. Coverage ratio 8.6 pe chala gaya 8%. My worry is that that's going to be challenged in this next 6 to 9 months. And again, if I take what Khurram is saying, with all these moratoriums, the numbers will go significantly higher. And then if you look at the AD ratios, I think banks, which is a criticism also, are sitting at around 50%. Large banks, if you look at medium-sized banks, they're around 60%, and small banks are sitting at 70%. And I think that's why it's a tale of two cities. I think some banks will weather the storm quite well and can be a real liquidity provider to the needy companies, and they can really play a very big role. And my experience in my 30-year banking history, these are the times where you build relationships. These are the times when you develop long, deep relationships where you can come in and really support companies that have been your clients because they genuinely are in need. And if you can demonstrate to them you're there for them at this time, they are your clients for life. So I think it's a great opportunity for doing that. Hamara jo Pakistan ke ek aur jo, in a way, which is something we've been criticizing. Somebody made the comment ke Bangladesh or Vietnam some bar ye kar rahe the. But again, if you look at it, our credit to GDP is half that of India and third of Bangladesh, which is a good news here. So for a change, these figures are going to help us. Export to GDP, if you look at it, our numbers are, we are the 10th lowest country in the world. This was the same criticism we were getting, but because of that, we may get buffered because wahi jo maine shuru mein baat kari thi, our linkages will maybe help us. Consumers are levered. House loans, agar aap taking, they're very highly unlevered. And I think the housing scheme that the Prime Minister has announced and some of the changes in the legal laws will really boost that. But today, 70 to 80,000 out of the 32 million households have outstanding loans, which is peanuts. And I think that's again an opportunity. Majority of the businesses and the ones that will get impacted, as some of my panelists have been talking about, is the SME sector. This is the sector that has been relatively untouched by the banking sector, and we can talk about it, why nots and all that. But I think this is the sector that will require the most amount of liquidity. But the good news is banks are not going to be short of liquidity because they are relatively buffered, especially the large size banks. And I think what measures the State Bank has done are very welcome and very timely because that will provide the necessary buffer that we'll need. So I think coming to the solutions, what I think is we need to continue to look at the regulator and work with the regulator in supporting the asset classification and provisioning if norms are stressed for a longer period of time. Promulgation of one-time restructuring window hum ek kar dein, where we can have all these discussions with genuine companies. Introduction of cross guarantees that we can do, guarantee schemes for COVID-related companies. I think that will come in very handy. I've been talking about digital. I may sound like a broken record, but again, I think drive and increase the bank population on a war footing, because I think that can take away a lot of cost that's built into the system. And I think that's done. We will need to support NBFCs and microfinance banks because that's where they get hit by giving them tax payments. Force majeure and these things are done, but uske aur implications hai, and that should be done in concert with consultation with everybody. It's easy to take a force majeure, but again, a lot of people on this call and people, I think there's straight implication. What we need right now is support the SME sector, and the support that SME sector, we need banks to step up and provide the necessary support in concert and conjunction with the regulator, and wherever support can be provided with the government to get cross guarantees. There are many structures. Globally, we have done it. Standard Chartered has been doing this in many other markets. And I think if we do that and if we insulate and buffer that sector, which has typically not been banked so far, I think it can really give the much needed support and liquidity to that very needed sector and get some of our export businesses back on track, because some of these businesses, because of lockdown, have ready orders which they cannot fulfill. And I think that's going to hit the export numbers that some of my colleagues were talking about. So I think these are a few things, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Shehzad. And Dr. Amjad Saab, so the liquidity and the cash is the king. That's what Khurram was talking about, then Shehzad was talking about. So what's your view where we can generate that liquidity, particularly the sector which is very much undocumented? What is your advice or solution for that SME sector which may not have access to those cash flows which they might need at the right now? You are mute on, Dr. If you can unmute yourself. Very quickly, and I'm cautious of time, and it's already 10:45, so we will try to wrap up in another 5 minutes, and we will move to the question. So
yeah, basically, you can hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So SMEs, I think basically we should really look at what Bangladesh came up with just a couple of days ago. I think an excellent package where because basically what I fear is that tens of thousands of businesses will go bankrupt, within months, because they're stuck in a liquidity crunch. They don't have cash to pay to their employees, to the suppliers. They're not getting cash from what already they have sold, and so on. So it's a very critical issue where if tens of thousands of businesses basically go bankrupt, that means hundreds of thousands of people are going to lose jobs. So I think we need to look at what Bangladesh has done. For example, they have offered working capital. They have offered 2.5, 3 years loan. The government has offered, where the business is putting in, say, 4%, and the government is putting in 5%. So the loan is at 9%. And then obviously the banks are encouraged. The vehicle is banks, and I think we should also be using microfinance banks, because they already have experience of lending to small businesses. So banks and microfinance banks can be used, but typically we have seen that there's a lot of risk aversion of banks from lending to small businesses, medium-sized businesses, where there's no
and particularly undocumented businesses.
Exactly, and there, unless the government comes up with some type of a guarantee, where there's some type of a sharing of bad debts between the government and the bank. So it's the bank's still responsibility to have sufficient collateral and do whatever due diligence it needs to do. But if in case of default or something, then the government has to come in and offer some type of an insurance to banks. Otherwise, government can come out with a very good package, can offer a certain discount on the interest rate, but banks will not be willing to lend. So I think this is a critical element. The second thing is, what worries me, what I heard Hamad Saab say, basically we are asking companies to not fire people. And also the Sindh government came out that, companies cannot fire people. Now that's, I think, is very worrisome to me, at least. I mean, obviously in good faith, companies should try to keep people. They should share. So if there is some salary cut, that should be taken at all levels. Seniors take it, the junior employees take it. However, forcing companies to not let people go means that a lot more companies will go bankrupt. And I think the basic objective should be to save the companies, because if companies are still there 3-4 months down the road, 6 months down the road, they would start come back and basically rehiring the same employees, even if they have let go right now. The other thing I'll just quickly mention, that 12,000 rupees per per family is extremely low for a 4-month period, which comes to about 3,000 rupees per month for a family of 8. I think the government needs to double that, which means from 144 billion, take it to about 300 billion, and maybe give 2 installations of 12,000 rather than giving 1 installation, and move quickly on it. The third thing is, I would really say, is exports, as Shahzad has already mentioned. 65% of the orders have been cancelled, export orders have been cancelled, but 35% of the orders were there, but the government, especially the Sindh government, shut the exports business down. I think we need to open the business and we need to fulfill those commitments. And basically, for example, what Bangladesh government has done, they're giving, again, financing at 2% to exporters. And also in terms of import of raw material for exporters, they're again providing very financing at very cheap rates. These are type of things that the government needs to do across the board.
Thank you. Thank you, Amjad Saab. And quick words from you, Maheen, in terms of, again, going back to the fundamental, is the cash is king, liquidity, and we are talking about significantly a sector which is not digitized and undocumented. That's one side of the problem. And like Dr. Amjad Saab mentioned, around even their labor or their employees may not be documented, where we can extend the support directly. So over to you, Maheen, your comment and recommendations around liquidity.
So I think my colleagues have already mentioned quite a few of the steps that can be taken towards SME. लेकिन एक बहुत बड़ा area है जहाँ liquidity generate हो सकती है in order to really help SME and to help small businesses. And one is freeing up the government's liquidity itself. We've mentioned that 12,000 rupees is very small, but we have to look at the government's capacity constraint here. In cheezon mein, actually the advantage in situations like this, if you can call it that, is that you can throw the economic rule book and the policy making rule book out of the window and really start from scratch. And I think that's what we need to look at. One of the biggest constraints of government liquidity is government debt, whether it is domestic debt or whether it is foreign debt. In particular, when we talk about foreign debt, then IMF की जो conditionalities थी, IMF के जो loans हैं, World Bank के जो loans हैं, ADB के जो loans हैं, this is the time where the government needs to be having conversations with these institutions to say, either we reschedule or we find another way to pay it, because it makes absolutely no sense in this environment जब आप social sector पे focus कर रहे हैं और आप SME पे focus कर रहे हैं और आप हर industry पे cash grants देना चाह रहे हैं या लोगों को cash, you are now just also looking at how to fund your domestic debt situation. So यहाँ पे I think बहुत important है that we talk about rescheduling of IMF loans. We talk about not necessarily meeting the current repayment plans and shifting these out to the future as well, because that releases a lot of government liquidity, which then comes into people's hands. The second aspect of this is really, and this is where the rest of the world certainly seems to have taken action, and that is on interest rates. अब interest rates के बारे में हमने discussion तो बहुत की है इस group में, लेकिन reality ये है कि the government is probably the net biggest beneficiary of interest rate reductions in the economy. And just reducing interest rates, even if we drop by an additional 2% by the end of the year, would substantially free up the domestic debt burden in terms of reducing the interest payments that have to be made to domestic lenders. तो इस regard में one key element is कि हम government का भी जो debt burden है उसको हम किस तरह कम करें ताकि जो social nets पे जो spending हो रही है वो ज़्यादा आराम से हो जाए. I think the other aspect that we've talked about digitization a lot. I think इस पे अगर speed up हो जाए तो फिर ये जो सारे कैश ट्रांसफर्स जो होने हैं, चाहे हाउसहोल्ड्स को होने हैं, बिजनेसेस को होने हैं, इन अ कोविड लाइक सिचुएशन आपके पास इतना टाइम नहीं होता कि आप जो है ट्रांसफर्स को फिजिकली या मैन्युअली करें, क्योंकि इस वक्त जो है इन्फेक्शन रेट इतना हाई है. तो इस पॉइंट पे स्टेट बैंक को कम से कम अपने पेमेंट्स प्लेटफॉर्म्स पे शुड बी वर्किंग ऑन फुल स्पीड ऑन दैट, ताकि जो बिस्क के थ्रू या फिर एहसास प्रोग्राम के थ्रू आपके सोशल सेफ्टी नेट्स डेवलप हो रहे हैं वो डिजिटल तरीके में एक्चुअली डिलीवर हो ऑन द पेमेंट्स साइड. तो आई थिंक ये चीजें हैं which can help quite significantly on the grassroots. Beyond the points that my colleagues are saying, I think we need to free up the domestic debt burden and the international debt burden for the government as well. And this is the time, I think, जहां आपके पास रूम है ये डिस्कशंस करने का, specifically with the IMF and the World Bank, etc.
Thank you, Mahin. And you picked up two very interesting areas. One, we have to start from the scratch, so we should not follow the same economic and policy rule books, and how we can create liquidity from the government side. So coming to Muzammal, I think what you will be proposing, like in terms of the economic model, which country can opt, and we are in the process of budgeting, and we are also in the process of creating a new economic model. That's what the Planning Commission is doing. So Muzammal, over to you. What you will recommend to businesses and the government, how they can help businesses as well as the people of Pakistan to go through this current crisis or challenges which we are facing now?
I think so far the government of Pakistan has done tremendously well, and nobody was expecting government was about to give 1.2 trillion rupees package. That is a very big number if we talk about, and if we compare with any other economy, especially our peers, India and as well as Bangladesh. The other thing I would like to give due credit to Governor State Bank. I have been covering economy for the last 20 years. I've never seen such a proactive central bank governor in the past 20 years. Since this COVID thing happened, the first move he took on 17th of March, he cut the discount rate by 75 basis points. Within the span of 1 week, he again cut the discount rate by 200 basis points. He gave hand to the exporters. He gave his support to the banking sector. He gave support to the SMEs as well. Not only this, he also he had looked after the consumers in the form of credit card bills. If there is any car installment payments, he already advised banking sector to delay it or to defer it and to facilitate them. So that is the key. And I think if you compare, I have not seen Indian central bank or the Bangladesh central bank the way Pakistan central bank have done the things. Not only this has given huge confidence to the markets as well. And if you look at the secondary market interest rates, although the discount rate interest State Bank policy rate is 11.5%, what I heard last week is 5-year PIB bond has been traded at 9.25%. So secondary market is, this indicates that the market is not short of liquidity at all. There is ample liquidity in the system. In fact, the problem what the fund managers are witnessing is they are not finding avenues where to park their surplus liquidity. So all we need is to be organized, and we have already the central bank as well as the government, they have provided the package. Government needs to focus more, because whatever the package they have announced, people have a less faith. On the contrary, State Bank, whatever the incentives or this liquidity provided by central bank, it's already in place. So government needs to focus, especially throughout in this forum, we have talked about vulnerables. We have to make sure the money should transfer to the vulnerable, but equally we need to see, the hardcore money should go to the agriculture sector. We are just about to harvest our wheat crop. If that money will be efficiently transferred to the farmers, it will come back to economy, and we will see, everybody will get their due share as well. So liquidity, I don't think so. Liquidity is an issue, be it on the external side as well as on the domestic side. All we need is to get organized.
Thank you, Muzamil. Any final word from Khurram, and then we will move to some top themes which we can pick up from the chat, and we will come back to that. So Khurram, any final comment from your side, and then we will go to the question answer. 1 minute, please.
अच्छा, मैं थोड़ा सा स्ट्रेटजी पे बात करूंगा कि जैसे मैंने पहले प्रेजेंट किया कि कितना हमें रिक्वायरमेंट है इस वक्त अगले 3 से 6 महीने में। देखिए, हमें फोकस्ड होना है कि कितनी रिक्वायरमेंट है, कहाँ से इनफ्लो आएगा, कैसे हमने आउटफ्लो उसका करना है, उसको फंड कैसे करना है। देखिए, अभी स्ट्रैटेजी क्या होनी चाहिए। लेट्स से रेट कट होता है। देखिए, 2 बड़ी फोर्सेस हैं, वन इज द स्टेट बैंक ऑफ पाकिस्तान, द अदर वन इज गवर्नमेंट ऑफ पाकिस्तान। दोनों को कोऑर्डिनेटेड एफर्ट्स करनी है, एक साथ बैठना है, ताकि फिस्कल और मॉनेटरी मेजर जो मेजर्स लेने हैं उनको कोऑर्डिनेटेड तरीके से ले सके। ये बहुत अच्छी बात है कि हमें फोकस होना है। स्ट्रेटजी क्या होनी चाहिए। देखिए, एक तो होता है एलोकेशन, गवर्नमेंट एलोकेशन कर दी 1200 अरब की, 1300 अरब की, 800 अरब की, जो भी है, उसकी टाइमली डिलीवरी बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट है। हम लोग डिलीवरी पे अभी फोकस नहीं हो रहे। हमने एक अनाउंस कर दिया, उसको कैसे एक आम आदमी तक पहुंचाना है, दैट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। अदरवाइज उसका कोई फायदा नहीं होगा, चाहे वो 2 ट्रिलियन हो, 4 ट्रिलियन हो, कुछ भी हो। हम कैसे कर सकते हैं, ये स्ट्रेटजी क्या हो सकती है, टाइमली डिलीवरी कैसे हो सकती है। देखिए, हमारे पास डेटा है, डेटा इज द न्यू गोल्ड। हमारे पास अगर डेटा है, हम सब कुछ कर सकते हैं। मिसाल के तौर पे हमारे पास 160 मिलियन के सब्सक्राइबर बेस है, जो है वो टेलीकोस की, जो मोबाइल फोन यूजर्स हैं 160 मिलियन है, विच इज अबाउट 90% प्लस ऑफ द एंटायर पॉपुलेशन का, जितना भी जो है वो यूज करते हैं मोबाइल फोन्स। उसके साथ साथ हमारे पास नादरा का डेटा है। देखें, हमें काम क्या करना है, हमें ये देखना है कि हम इन दोनों को अगर मैच करें, इन दोनों को मैच करके हम ये देखें कि जो मोबाइल यूजर्स हैं, जो नादरा का डेटा है, कि किसके पास कितनी एबिलिटी है, कितनी अर्निंग्स है, कौन किस किस लेवल पे है। मिसाल के तौर पे किसके पास बैंक अकाउंट है, किसके पास गाड़ी है, किसके पास घर है, जिसके पास जो है वो कितना बिल आता है, 5000, 2000, 4000 प्लस बिल आता है, उनको एक तरफ करें। जो पिरामिड के बिल्कुल बॉटम पे हैं उनको आइडेंटिफाई करें, वो आई एम श्योर 80-90 मिलियन लोग जरूर होंगे, उनको आप कैश ट्रांसफर करना शुरू करें। और ये देखें, कोऑर्डिनेटेड एफर्ट के थ्रू होगा। स्टेट बैंक अगर टाइम पे रेट कट करता है, लिक्विडिटी सिस्टम में आती है, बिजनेसेस को सपोर्ट मिलती है। जैसे मैंने पूरा एक टेबल शो करवाया है कि किस तरह से आउटफ्लोज इनफ्लोज मैनेज हो सकते हैं। अगर ये हम जल्दी इसकी डिलीवरी टाइमली करना चाहें, हम लेट ना करें। देखें, ऑलरेडी 14 दिन हो चुके हैं, हम 14 दिन के बाद अभी भी ये बात कर रहे हैं कि कैसे डिलीवरी होगी। आप देखें, जो पुअर है, जो वेजर है, वो तो सर्वाइव कैसे कर रहा है आपको नहीं पता। तो इसलिए हमें ये सोचना है कि हमें डिलीवर कैसे करना है। हमारे पास डेटा भी है, सब कुछ है, उसको हमने टाइमली डिलीवर करें। अगर हम डेटा की बेसिस पे स्क्रीन करके, आई एम श्योर हम कामयाब होंगे इंशाल्लाह इसके साथ लड़ने में।
Correct. Thank you, Karam. So I think it's all around the speed. So I'll pick up a couple of themes. There are certain questions where we have seen some repeated themes, and one of the theme which is keep coming back is more around what's going to happen with the job losses. Although there are a lot of concern, and the government has notification as well, which might be have its own legal issues. So the job loss is the primary concern or a theme which we are seeing in the comments. So Muzammil, from your side, what you see around the job loss, do you see that happening, and what would be your advice to people?
I think we are fortunate because the one thing is for sure, as soon as this COVID lockdown will be over, we can see a steep demand, be it from local side as well as from the export side. Let me tell you one thing. We are into the exports, and the kind of exports are in is very basic. What I heard from different rice exporters is they have been getting better and more demand in terms of rice export, because Europe and US, they are looking for more food staple. Plus, we are into the bed sheet thing and towel business. We are one of the leading towel exporter as well. The towel demands has been on rise since this COVID all over the world. Plus the bed sheets, especially from the hospitals as well. The only thing what I can see in terms of exports is lacking is garment sector, because entire Italy and France is closed because of this lockdown. So I can see this is where we can see some slowdown, but rest of the exports are good. On the contrary, agriculture, as I just mentioned, we are going to witness a bumper wheat crop, plus agriculture is doing good. So our basic, the manpower is linked with agriculture and agriculture allied industry, which is, if you look at the economic survey, it shows 60 to 65% of our labor force is attached to it. So we are relatively immune as far as this crisis concerned, if we compare to global, hit. But I can tell you one thing, what we need to do is, moving forward, as soon as once we're done with this crisis, we need to start work on Saturdays as well. We have 52 Saturdays all over the entire year. So if we work, if we say 35 Saturdays, if we are going to work, we can compensate easily whatever the outcome loss we have made in the last 20 days, I would say. Lastly, I would like to mention one thing. Because, as I just mentioned, there is a sufficient liquidity in the system, and government is flushing liquidity, central bank is flushing liquidity, we might get some foreign liquidity as well. If we are not going to match with the output or productivity, we might see inflation, because that is too much money will be chasing too few goods phenomena we will witness. So we need to make sure, we need to bring back to the productivity curve in order to ensure to reduce or to keep the price level stable. That is a very key thing, and government needs to keep an eye on this as well.
Thank you, Muzammil. And I think there's another question, and that's a very interesting and relevant question, that there's 40 to 50% of the economy is off the book. That's a sweeping statement, but that's one of our comment, and we recognize that there is a certain economy which is not as documented as we would like that to be. So what will happen with that economy? How it's gonna get impacted? So Dr. Amjad Sahab,
Sorry, Sajid, I can't hear you.
and I will come back to you as well. is off the book economy. So how they will.
I think Dr. Amjad, you can answer the question.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. Can you repeat the question?
The question was how, the informal economy employment to stay or to get compensated in this COVID crisis.
Okay, I think we need to look at what I would call a smart shutdown. I think shutting down industries, first of all, completely, and then putting all these people, in tens of thousands in trains and buses, loading them in that and sending them back home. I don't think, and I mean, I think it was more of a health risk than keeping them within factories. I think we need to now move towards a smart shutdown. And I think shutting down exports especially was not a smart move. Shutting down industries was not a smart move. And now again, we see, for example, Multan, I think factories are operating. Karachi, they're not operating. So I think we need to ensure that there are sufficient, basically health measures taken. And anyway, basically right now, or even if they can operate at 1/3 the normal, capacity, I think that would be a good achievement. And so basically, I think the government and the industry needs to sit down. They need to have some health parameters, and we need to move towards a smart shutdown. And again, I think that basically when there's a chain, so those which are totally, in an informal economy, I mean, right now the only ways direct cash, to Sanya Nishtar is working at, but but right now with this undocumented economy, this I think, and it's a million families, which is about the population, will have access to this 12,000, which I am proposing should be more 24,000 over the next 4 months.
I think host is offline at the moment, maybe due to the connectivity. So and Khurram, you were raising hand. If you want to add something, meanwhile he will come back. So please,
Yes, thank you, Muzamil. Actually, I wanted to raise this undocumented economy side of the thing. इसमें एक चीज ये है कि as per State Bank 30% of course our economy is undocumented. यही सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज है. जैसे डॉक्टर साहब ने भी कहा कि उनको रीच आउट कैसे करना है. जैसे मैंने पहले कहा कि जो हमारी लेबर फोर्स है एज पर वर्ल्ड बैंक 75 मिलियन की जो है टोटल लेबर फोर्स है, उसमें से 76% रफली कोई 56-57 मिलियन जो है वो अनडॉक्यूमेंटेड है. तो उनको पहुंचना कैसे पड़ेगा. देखिए उसका एक तरीका तो ये है, जैसे मैंने पहले अर्ज किया कि फोन सबके पास हैं. आज फोन एटलीस्ट सबके पास हैं. एटलीस्ट मेरे पास फोन है. अगर मैं मिसाल के तौर पे पसपांदा तरीन इलाके में रहता हूं और मेरे पास फोन है, मेरे मोहल्ले में 4 फोन्स हैं और 6-10 फैमिलीज हैं, तो मेरे थ्रू भी मैं भी एक जरिया बन सकता हूं कि मुझे भेजा जाए और मुझे रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी दी जाए कि मैं अपने 10 और फैमिलीज 10 घरों को जाके कैश को दे सकूं या कैश उनके लिए लाके उनके डिस्ट्रीब्यूट कर सकूं. देखिए देयर आर लॉट ऑफ वेज टू डू इट. अगर हम बैठ के डेटा पे काम करें और डेटा के थ्रू इस चीज को इम्प्लीमेंट करें कि फोन्स जो हैं, आज हम जो बात कर रहे हैं डिजिटल इकोनॉमी की बात कर रहे हैं, सारा वर्चुअल है. तो हमारे अगर 160 मिलियन 16-16.5 करोड़ लोगों के पास फोन्स हैं, उनसे क्या हम 200 मिलियन या 225 मिलियन पॉपुलेशन को नहीं पहुंचा सकते चीजें? क्यों नहीं पहुंचा सकते? बात यह है कि हम वी हैव टू सिट डाउन एंड पुट आवर हेड्स टुगेदर और इसको फौरन से हमने करना है. देखिए टेलकोज आपके साथ खड़ी हों, स्टेट बैंक के सर्विस बहुत बेहतरीन है, उनके पास हर तरह का डेटा है. हम डेटा को सामने रखते हुए उसकी बेसिस पे अगर हम काम, बीआईएसपी का इतना अच्छा डेटा है, बीआईएसपी पे 5.5-6-50 लाख से ज्यादा लोग हैं. उसके अलावा आपके पास जो है सबसे बड़ा डेटा तो ईओबीआई का है. ईओबीआई पे तो सारे वर्कर्स लिस्टेड हैं. हमारे पास सब कुछ है, हमें सिर्फ बैठ के उसको एक जगह करके रिफाइन करके फौरन से एक्ट करने की जरूरत है. जितना जल्दी एक्शन होगा, चाहे वो 3,000 पहुंचाएं, 5,000 रुपए पहुंचाएं, 10,000 रुपए पहुंचाएं, उतना जल्दी उनकी जो है वो दर्द कम होगा और ये जो अनडॉक्यूमेंटेड सेगमेंट है इसको हम हैंडल कर सकेंगे इंशाल्लाह। अच्छा, एक मैं चीज और ऐड करना चाहूंगा तिवाना साहब, अगर हम आप थोड़ा बता दें कि किस तरह से मूव ऑन कर रहे हैं, कि इसमें हम अपॉर्चुनिटी पे भी बात कर सकते हैं कि अपॉर्चुनिटी क्या है। अगर मैं इस पे थोड़ा सा, अगर मुझे आप टाइम दे दें कि मैं इस पे अपॉर्चुनिटी बताता हूं कि पाकिस्तान के लिए अपॉर्चुनिटी क्या है। तो विद योर परमिशन तिवाना साहब।
I think Sajid is back.
Shahzad Dada would like to add.
Yeah, please Shahzad, add that and we will come back.
Okay.
Yeah, नहीं, welcome back, Sajid. नहीं, ये बात हो रही थी ना. Look, I personally think we all are saying pretty much the same thing in different shades of grey. The point is, SME sector को बचाना है, documentation करना है, digital करना है, and take advantage of this so that we come out of this stronger, better, faster. And I think to do that, it's also, let's face it, this sector has been undocumented. As I was looking at some of the questions coming out, and how do we get this thing done rightfully? This could become your best data bank. And again, I'm just putting overseas chamber. If I look at our Nestle's or Unilever's, they all are linked to the ecosystem, supply side. So मैं बता रहा था कि supply side को digitally करें, उसको link करें, और वो ultimately आपके ये SME sector को जाएगा. You can be a multinational, you can be one of the largest companies in Pakistan, but ultimately आपको दूध खरीदना होगा from the bhanswala. You know, that's the whole linkages. And if we can create that, and at this time, while these people require the support and the help, they also become your source of documentation for future catastrophes. You will have a whole supply chain linked up, and you will also have data that will allow formal sector to bank them, because आपके पास वो data होगा. और इस दौरान में आप जो corporate sort of joint guarantees or bilateral arrangements karke, working with overlay guarantees and State Bank and others, you can do it. So I think this is a great opportunity. While it's there's a lot to be done, and as Khurram was also saying, what people need to sit down, put it together. But I think take advantage of the ecosystem build up that's much needed. Take advantage of digital, because that's required. And yes, we skip a generation. Do mobile. Use mobiles as your ways and means to getting that, and use this data to also make better, because a country cannot run at 10% tax to GDP with 200 companies paying 1/3 of your tax revenues. I'm sorry, sir. We need everybody to step up here. Okay, this is not the time to talk about this, but this is a time to take advantage of that misplacement so that we are well placed.
Thank you, Shahzad. And I'm very conscious of the time right now. We are somewhere like overrun by 30 minutes. So I think great session. Thank you very much, all the panelists, and thank you very.
I think we lost Sajid again. We are thankful for the participation from all panelists, and we have had great discussion. There are significant points that we can take from here. It has been, I think, a learning opportunity for some of us as well to hear from all of the panelists. Once again, we thank the participants, as the panelists, as well as the people who came up with the question and made time, dedicated time from their personal time to this debate and discussion. We aim to have further discussions. The second one is planned tomorrow, and we hope to see most of you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you for having us. Bye.
Thank you, Shahzad.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Zanfar.